opportunities to all organizations. No company or political party can exist forever running on the same business model. We earn the right to exist through the power of innovation. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here and share my thoughts, and thank you for driving the political campaigns of our nation. I look forward to partnering with all of you to capture the Latino opportunity with the Entravision Media platform.
Thank you, Walter. We deeply appreciate your support of today's luncheon. Before we begin our official program, I have some recognitions I'd like to make. I'd like for our AAPC Treasurer, Brad Chisholm, to please stand. He's been our full partner in what's going to be a great and successful conference. Brad, please stand up. Over the past several months, we've worked on preparing the program for this conference and this event, and there have been three very special people who've given countless hours to make this possible. All the details that go into planning an event like this. My dear friend from Philadelphia, Doc Schweitzer. Doc, would you stand up? And one of my close Republican friends, Becky Donatelli. Becky, would you stand up? And finally, Lorena Chambers. She's been a real trooper for me. Lorena? Also seated among you are members of our Board of Directors, but all of our Board of Directors, please stand so people can see where you are. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask our Vice President, Art Hackney, if he would please come to the podium. I'll turn it over to you, Art.
Thank you, Dale. My name's Art Hackney. I am the incoming president following Dale to this organization, which I'm very proud to be a part of. The year my wife and I were married, we became AAPC members, which is now some 23 years ago. I joined the board in 2002. I've been proud to have battled very hard to make the Hall of Fame the very special occasion, which I believe is the signature of our conference each year now. It lets us put a human face on industry icons whose mythology we often just idealize or demonize. On the Republican side, we have 4 inductees this year, 2 posthumous and 2 living. And to kick off our inductees, I would like to bring AAPC Chairman and past President Whit Ayers to introduce our first inductee.
Thank you, Art, and welcome, everyone. I have been a part of AAPC for more than 2 decades now, and I am convinced that this is the single best thing we do, honoring the icons, the giants of our industry who have served us for many, many, many years. It's my honor today and my privilege to say a few words about one of the giants of political polling, Bob Teeter. Back when I first started thinking about becoming a political pollster, there were only 4 names that anybody ever heard on the Republican side. One was Richard Worthland. Dr. Worthland was inducted into this Hall of Fame 4 years ago. 2 others are Art Finkelstein and Lance Terrence, whom you will hear more about in just a moment. And the 4th was Bob Teeter. It's hard to believe that Bob was involved in every single Republican presidential campaign for a quarter century. From Richard Nixon in 1968 through George H.W. Bush in 1992, Bob played a critical role as a pollster and a strategist for all of those campaigns. He also helped found, with Peter Hart, the eminent Democratic pollster, the NBC News Wall Street Journal survey, which remains today one of the best respected of the media surveys. Peter Hart called Bob the Joe DiMaggio of political the field, the ultimate professional. He was also known as mild-mannered and even-tempered. Those are not two phrases normally associated with people in this business, but he certainly was that. He was known for his creative analytical techniques that many of us take for granted today, as well as his keen insight. I remember him particularly stressing the importance of an agenda in a political campaign, telling political candidates, this is not about you, this is about the voters, and you better tell them what you're going to do if you get elected, because it's ultimately about them. Charlie Black remembers Bob. Charlie worked with Bob in a number of these presidential campaigns as a meticulous researcher, but also one who was very, very straight with his clients, one who talked truth to power. The client would say, I'm really popular, aren't I, Bob? And Bob would say, no, sir, you're not, and here's why. And it helps to have people in our business who are willing to talk straight to people in enormous power. Bob joined and then became president of Market Opinion Research in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He also started his own firm named after his beloved hometown of Coldwater Associates. It is a distinct pleasure for me to have the privilege of honoring him. I will accept the award on his behalf, and we will get it to his family in Michigan. Please join me in honoring the memory of a true giant of our industry and a giant in political polling, Bob Teeter.
Thank you, Whit. To introduce our second long overdue inductee, I would like to ask Frank Donatelli to come to the stage.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to say a few words and to say thank you very much for the honor that you do to present this award to our dear friend Lee Atwater. And on behalf of his lovely wife Sally, who you will be hearing from momentarily, and Lee's mother is also here, I want to say how thankful we are to all of you for the honor that you bestow upon us. I first met Lee during the 1980 Reagan campaign, which seems like eons ago, and I worked full-time in the campaign, as did Lee, and some of our other colleagues from that campaign are here. Charlie Black is here, and Rick Shelby, Frank Fahrenkopf, Kenny Kling. And I remember my first conversation with Lee. I mean, when you're talking to Lee, you got to pay real close attention, because Lee, every word that he said had some significance. And so we're talking about the coming campaign, and I was expressing concern, and Lee looked at me and said with his husky voice, I'm going to try to do my best, Atwater, he said, Frank, don't you worry about the South. They'll do the right thing. You just go win those Yankee states. And he was absolutely right. We were successful, and he won every single southern state that year. Lee brought a unique blend of talent to every one of his campaigns. He was a voracious reader of history, but also possessed key political insights and a rare appreciation of public opinion. Everyone knows Lee as the mastermind of campaigns for two different presidents, but he also helped to remake the image of longtime Senator Strom Thurmond and was the driving force in electing Governor Carroll Campbell in South Carolina, the election that ushered in GOP's dominance in that state. Lee was also an original thinker. So many words that we take for granted today really came from Lee. Take, for example, the phrase defining moment. That was Lee's creation as a result of the dust-up many years ago between his client, then Vice President George Bush, and Dan Rather. By explaining it in those terms, Lee turned a negative into a positive and created the image of a scrappy underdog that then Vice President Bush rode to victory several months later. Or how about the word big tent, something that everybody uses today? The notion that a political party should be open to a variety of adherents. That was Lee's terminology also. Lee was almost certainly the first White House staffer to subscribe to the National Enquirer. When told by a White House administrator that this was a most unusual selection, he innocently replied, quote, "I'm just trying to keep up with what real America is thinking." Lee was also one of a kind when it came to RNC chairs. I think he's still the only chairman to record a blues album. I'm not sure that any Democrat chairman could say the same thing. I know Lee was the only one to perform a selection at an RNC function with President Bush entitled Tina Nina Nu. I thought Frankie Valli was a stretch for Republicans. You should have seen the look on some of the donors when they heard that line. When I worked at the RNC in 2008, I was proud to welcome Lee's daughter, Sally, as one of our summer interns. The Atwater name is alive and well, still within the GOP. Late in life, Lee turned reflective, as anyone facing the end would. He spoke movingly about the spiritual vacuum at the heart of American society and about his family and how much they meant to him. But if making a difference means anything, it aptly summarizes Lee's life. Thank you for recognizing Lee's contribution in his life work that was so important to him. Thank you very much. For purposes of accepting the award, I did want to ask Lee's lovely wife, Sally, to come to the podium. Sally?
Thank you, Frank, for such kind words. Becky, thank you for all your help. And to many of Lee's friends sitting in these tables over here, please stand up and let them see him. You're a part of his history, too. Lee's mother is here. Please stand up. Lee's nephew, Chris King, and my nephew, who's now in Washington, is here. On behalf of the American Association for Political Consultants, we do want to thank you for this award. Lee would be very pleased with this. As his wife, I can share with you that Lee was a winner. He loved politics, and he was born for it. Politics didn't make Lee Atwater. Lee Atwater made the political campaign that it is today. From the Purple Martin Festival in St. Matthews, South Carolina, and the Chitlin Strut in Sally, South Carolina, Lee knew and targeted his audiences. Lee participated in all aspects of a campaign management. When he accepted the role of campaign manager and campaign consultant, that candidate got Lee Atwater 24 hours a day. And he always was there, and he rose every morning, and I can attest, saying, what can I do to get he or she elected? Lee also worked very, very hard, and he studied every aspect of human nature, just like Frank said. He got degrees in history and journalism and political science. And he tried to pick those candidates that he thought would be good for our country and strengthen the role of the individual and family. It is with that honor that I really do thank you for having awarded him this. I know he would greatly love to be here, and I'm thrilled that you recognize him and that his legacy lives on. Thank you.
And now, in turning to our living inductees, I'd like to ask AAPC board member Dan Hazelwood to come and make our first.
On behalf of the AAPC Board of Directors, I'm honored to present this Hall of Fame award to Arthur Finkelstein. In a town and a business where most politicians believe history begins with their own arrival, it's kind of nice to have fitting that we honor someone who's been in this business for nearly 5 decades. It's not an exaggeration to say that the modern Republican Party and the conservative movement owes a lot of its successes, built a lot of its successes on the shoulders of Arthur, the work of his clients, and the people he mentored in our industry. I refer to him as Arthur. When you get to be known by your first name, that usually means that you've made it in this business, hopefully in a good way, and that's certainly the case for Arthur. He started, like a lot of people in the Republican Party, galvanized to action by Barry Goldwater's 1964 campaign in Students for Goldwater. After that, he helped produce Ayn Rand's radio show in the 1960s. For those of you in this room who don't know who she is, perhaps you shouldn't be in this town. Arthur began his polling career in 1970, helping elect Jim Buckley on the Conservative Party ticket as a U.S. Senator from New York State. In a three-way, he beat the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in the state. That's an accomplishment that's still something even today. In 1972, he went on to work for the Committee to Re-elect the President, CREEP. Some of you may have heard about CREEP and its interactions with a certain hotel in this town. The story about Arthur, though, is he was the highest-ranking staff member never to be investigated, indicted, or pursued by the events of those days. I mentioned the Nixon reference because it's always a good punchline for any speech, but it's also a testament to Arthur. And as I talked to a lot of his colleagues and friends, one of the ongoing things in his career was his commitment to honesty and playing by the rules and not trying to bend things for advantage outside the norms of what is accepted under the law in particular. And that's something that we in this industry need to remember and keep conscious as we go forward. It's sometimes forgotten in the race to win. In 1976, Arthur was part of the Reagan primary effort to unseat President Gerald Ford. An argument can be made that without Arthur's involvement, Reagan's campaign might not have fared quite as well. As the campaign opened, just a little history lesson, the first 5 primaries Reagan had lost to Ford. Headed towards North Carolina, there were calls even from the conservative wing of the party, maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all, maybe Reagan wasn't the right choice. Arthur, along with one of his clients, Senator Jesse Helms, and a consultant, Tom Ellis, and others, took control of the North Carolina Reagan campaign and helped guide it. Reagan had talked about the Panama Canal Treaty, but they helped thrust that treaty into part of the main messaging of the campaign. He used the issue of the Panama Canal to drive the message that America did not need to meekly surrender to internationalism, that America standing strong was a good and proud thing. On a tactical side, Arthur also did something else. He helped force the campaign to focus on primary voters. In this era when we talk about micro-targeting and big data, back in '76, he sent out the staff and volunteers to all the county courthouses in North Carolina to assemble a Republican primary voter file. We take these things for granted. Back then, you had to assemble them by paper, and then they would run a GOTV and a direct mail campaign. That was big data. Reagan would win the North Carolina primary. He would get called to go down to Texas and help in the Texas primary campaign. Down there, he took an entirely different tack. He helped orchestrate an effort to encourage Democrats to cross over and vote in the Republican primary. Texas at that time in '76 was a Democratic-dominated state at all levels, so getting Democratic voters into the Republican Party expanded the pool. Reagan's victory there, he took 100% of the delegation, would go on, and those 2 victories helped be a key part of Reagan's challenge to Ford, solidified Reagan as the leader of the conservative movement in the Republican Party. It also showed how Arthur looked at campaigns and how he was willing to adapt tactics to the strategy needing to win. In one race, he was focused on primary voters, and on the other race, he was talking about expanding the pool and enlarging it. Now, Arthur's role he was involved with the Reagan efforts, but he was a lot more than just that. He helped, but in the early 1970s, the Republican Party was not robustly strong. You had Nixon. Republicans hadn't been in the majority in either chamber of Congress since the 50s. Conservatism was not the dominant philosophy within the Republican Party. And along came a group of people, many of which are sitting here today. Arthur was one of them, who started to launch campaigns and insurgencies to elect Republicans and conservatives in primaries and general elections. They defeated the old guard inside the party and Democrats as well. His clients included Senator Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, Orrin Hatch, Al D'Amato. Victories go on in New Hampshire, Florida, Minnesota, Idaho, Oklahoma, South Dakota. His client list in the 70s and early 80s was the backbone of the Republican Party and the conservative wing within the Republican Party. Those people established the ideological beachhead which led to the victories and the majorities of '94. We do stand on the shoulders of the people that he helped elect. He had other firsts. There was an organization in 1978 called NICPAC, which he was a key strategist for. Every independent expenditure effort today, every super PAC, can trace their DNA back to NICPAC. This was one of the first major efforts of independent expenditures where it went out and ran tough, combative campaigns against Democratic senators, elected them, and had a huge number of successes in '78. So when we think of that, Arthur was one of the early strategists for what we now take as routine efforts of IEs. I could go on and on about Arthur's victories. I just mentioned two others. He was central in creating George Pataki's campaign that unseated Mario Cuomo in New York. He would do a lot in New York over the years. He also has a tremendous amount of international clients, including Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. He has a storied career, but a few themes are clear and kept coming out as I would talk to his friends and colleagues that worked for him. He clearly, in the 1970s, brought a different style of to our campaigns. He was more combative and confrontational than had gone on before. That's something we're pretty familiar with now in campaigns. But he also had an intellectual aggressiveness about it. Campaigns were about big things. He wanted to divide voters, make voters choose on the big issues of the day: taxes, the economy, the Cold War versus the Soviet Union. He didn't differentiate on the trivial. He differentiated on the big. He also chose his candidates because of what they believed in. He wanted to change the world. He was motivated to be in this business, in this industry, because he wanted to change the world, not just to be famous. In fact, he avoids fame quite a lot. He set out to elect people who shared the values that he did, a very particular brand of conservatism, freedom, somewhat libertarian views. Third, while he prospered, he did not do this. He did not enter this business to get rich. In fact, the stories that I've been told over the past couple of weeks in preparation for today usually started off with this: well, you can't tell anybody about this. And then they would proceed to tell me the story about how someone tried to offer Arthur a whole lot of money to help him get elected. He didn't take every candidate just to make a buck. He, in fact, was pretty choosy. And then you look at sort of who Arthur spawned in this business. It includes employing and mentoring a pretty amazing list of people, some of which are here today. The list includes Alex Castellanos, Tony Fabrizio, John McLaughlin, Jim Murphy, John Lerner, Rick Reed, Ari Fleischer, Kieran Mahoney, Beth Myers, Craig Shirley, Roger Stone. That's just a partial list. If you don't know those names, you should, because each of those people in their own right have a pretty significant niche in the history of political operatives and what they've achieved. They are Arthur's kids. And then finally, a little known fact about Arthur. Arthur is responsible for why Rachel Maddow and MSNBC call themselves progressives and not liberals. The proof of this is in the slogans of the campaigns he waged. Slogans which include recklessly liberal, dangerously liberal, hopelessly liberal, too liberal for too long, hey buddy, you're a liberal, and the ever true, just another big government liberal. Therefore, the AAPC is proud to induct Arthur Finkelstein into our Hall of Fame. Thank you.
And now in a two-part presentation, I would like to invite AAPC board member Jim Innocenzi to introduce a short video that he produced for our final inductee.
I'm in the ad business, so I'm going to keep this really short. V. Lance Torrance is a frickin' legend. Don't take it from me, and see, Doc, I do have a filter, but don't take it from me, but take it from James Carville, who was once asked, what Republican pollster scares you? And he said, Torrance. I don't like that guy. He's not good. All right? The other thing you should know about Lance Torrance is that South is red today because he was the pioneer who did it. And the other thing that you'll see in this video are there are 3 individuals in this video who give testimonies and tell some really nice stories about Lance Torrance. And if you look at their accomplishments, you understand about Lance. One guy is the president of the largest polling firm in the world. The other guy is responsible for electing 3 U.S. presidents. And the last guy drives the Democrats nuts at Fox News. So here's the video.
I'm here today to honor a great man who deserves to be in the AAPC Hall of Fame for his success at survey research, Frank Luntz. V. Lance Torrance. V. Lance Torrance.
You know, Lance is one of the most talented guys I've ever worked with. There are many stories about Lance that I could blackmail him with, but I won't do that because he's too good a guy and he looks like a Boy Scout. Nobody would believe them anyway.
You found a passion and you took a risk and you started a company, but you did it not just for yourself, but for the other leaders and help other people create jobs for hundreds of others.
There's nobody I'd rather work with than Lance. He's not just a pollster. He not only comes up with accurate numbers, but is able to interpret them for clients and develop a strategy. Mitch McConnell was so far behind in his race, Lance and I almost had to flip a coin to figure out who was going to give him the bad news.
We'd be down in Texas having dinner, and Lance would say, there's a chance I'm going to get this guy, Mitch McConnell, elected to the Senate in Kentucky. Well, at that point, there were only 2 people in America who thought Mitch McConnell was going to win, Mitch McConnell and Lance. But Lance would say, we just might get this guy elected. Then he'd have another drink, and he'd say, there's a good chance we're going to get this guy elected. 3 or 4 drinks later, Lance would stand up and declare, Mitch McConnell's going to be a U.S. Senator. None of us believed it. It happened.
Lance and I would fight everyone to the bitter end. He developed a great strategy, I developed a funny ad, and Mitch is still in the Senate.
Bill Clinton was defeated in 1980 by a man named Frank White. Nobody saw this coming. And Lance was the pollster and the strategist who showed them a very narrow path by which you could beat Bill Clinton. And Lance wasn't shocked about it. Bill Clinton was. A lot of people knew how to go out and interview people and run numbers. But the theory that you had to make use of all the academic and social science work that was out there in order to do good political polling was pioneered by Lance Torrance. I've known Lance since the mid-'70s. When Lance and I started out, the South was Democratic. But 20% of the electorate were conservative Democrats. Lance's research and his strategic advice helped turn Texas to the Republican Party. Florida, he elected Republican governors. Lance was a campaign strategist.
For me, what I admire most are actually your entrepreneurial achievements. That part of your life, what you did, is what America needs more than anything. We need people that can create economic energy where none previously existed. It's really a great story of free enterprise.
Lance, congratulations. This is a big honor. You deserve it.
Thank you for all you've done for Terrence, for all you've done for Gallup, and especially, Lance, all you've done for our country.
Congratulations, Lance. Don't ever accept a Lifetime Achievement Award because they'll have a hearse waiting right outside for you.
For any Republican under the age of 40, it probably is mandatory after this to come up and talk to this man. He is that bright. Right now, I'm going to introduce Lance's little brother and a good friend of mine, Ed Goes.
Actually, Jimmy set me up because for years I used to always talk about Lance and I having a father-son relationship, but now that I'm 60, I think it has to be a big brother, little brother relationship. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here to induct Lance into the Hall of Fame. What we are accomplishing today is that we now have the 4 big pollsters, Arthur Finkelstein, Bob Teeter, Dick Wirthlin, and Lance Tarrance, all of which should be in the Hall of Fame, and as of today will be. And I think that's very important. I met Lance the first time in 1977. It was at a seminar in Virginia. I don't think he even remembers that I was there. I was 1 year out of managing my first congressional race. I was 2 years out of college. I was 3 years out of changing parties from being a Democrat to a Republican. And I sat there listening to this individual, Lance, speaking. And being from Oklahoma, the last thing I wanted to do is see anyone from Texas as being bigger than life. But there was absolutely no way you could walk away from his presentation and his discussion, and later the more in-depth discussion that went on after the seminar was closed down or moved to the bar. And I walked away from that saying that when I grew up, I wanted to be Lance Tarrance. And little did I know that 10 years later, he would call me and ask me to interview with his firm to open a Washington office. But my respect for him is no less today, and quite frankly, tenfold more than it was on that night when I was influenced and just so impressed with this bigger-than-life person. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the details of his political life. I think there's much that Lance wants to, and I think the video did some, but Lance wants to talk about today. So with him here today, I want to keep it fairly short out of respect for that. The last thing I would say is that there's a basic, and this is figuratively and literally. Lance is a person that likes to climb mountains. He has done so politically. He has done so personally. And the list of mountains he has climbed, everything from the Himalayas to the Canadian Rockies to the Spanish Pyrenees. He's climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Fuji, but it still pales to his always wanting to climb a mountain. And the one consistent theme you hear with many of these inductees into the Hall of Fame is their constant search for knowledge, their constant search for understanding, their constant search for understanding the people and what can be done to make things better for people. And I think that is a theme that runs through all the people, and more so in Lance than any other person. The last thing I will say, Lance, and I know that for Lance it is Lance Tarrance as opposed to Terrence, but I've been trying to get people to pronounce my name correctly for 35 years. It's just accept it for what it is. Lance, it's my honor, and please come up.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm one of the living inductees that's present today. You know, in research, to depart for a moment, you have the 3 ways to measure the universe: what is thought to be, which is what mostly politics is about, and what really is and what really should be. So a lot of these comments are appreciated, but just keep in mind that it's what is thought to be. It's with real pleasure that I accept this. I've been stunned by it.
and happy to be in with some of the great political strategists that I've really admired all my life. I want to issue my gratitude also to AAPC for doing this, and particularly Jim Monsenesi, who worked so hard on that video, and to Ed Goaz with his partners Brian Turngali and David Sackett for leading the company I founded to even greater heights and with dignity. But let's step back a minute. There's been a large-scale debate throughout the centuries whether the history of the world has been shaped by strong personalities or more by successful wars. Using that question, I'll let you decide. I want to cite some of the strong personalities that shaped my career and to give them thanks. And then I also want to mention a few of the lucky breaks that came my way. First to the people. Ray Bliss, chairman of the Republican National Committee a long time ago, took me under his wing after I'd moved to Washington, D.C. at the tender age of 27. He not only taught me the organizational side of the world, but he let me sit in his office when he was on the speakerphone with such congressional leaders as Eb Dirksen and John Rhodes and Gerald Ford. And I asked Bliss why he wanted me to hear some of these private discussions. He said he wanted me to learn the ways of Washington that could help me later in life, and he really wanted me to realize that America doesn't like losers, citing over and over again how the GOP had come back in 1966, just 24 months after a historic loss. I also want to thank Walt DeVries, and I wish he could be here, who earlier had been the chief strategist for Governor Romney's presidential effort, and also one of the people that conjured up the idea of the AACP. He inspired me to write 2 books, one on split-ticket voting in the 70s and one on divided government during the 90s. But more than that, though, he taught me noble aspects of American politics, not only trying to investigate the big themes, but also pushing me toward a fellowship at the Kennedy Institute and Harvard, a place that gave me an even deeper insight into the bigger picture of American politics. And I might add an appreciation of how rough the contest for ideas was going to be because Bob Shrum was also a Kennedy Fellow that year. I want to thank Jim Reese, the Texas businessman, who helped me run the business and started it, and I absolutely had no business experience whatsoever when I met him, but I did have a grand strategy in mind, based upon Kevin Phillips' geopolitical book, The Emerging Republican Majority. But it was Jim Reese that really helped me set that into motion, and I'll always remember that. And lastly, I want to thank Jim Clifton, now President and CEO of Gallup, for the value he saw in the company I created to not only acquire it, but also to put me on the board of Gallup and to give me an opportunity to see the Far East as the first managing director of Gallup China. But stepping back another minute, I also want you to know that the world can be shaped by successful wars as well, or opportunities not missed. Here are some of the lucky breaks or opportunities that came my way that I want to respect. First, choosing to work for a presidential campaign in my state right out of college, after being motivated by books by Ayn Rand, Herman Kahn, Conscious Conservative by Barry Goldwater, etc. Another was coming to Washington, D.C. as Assistant Director of Research for the RNC, position I first turned down, but my father told me I was crazy, saying you'll not get many chances to visit the nation's capital and be paid for it. And then I was lucky that I was later transferred to the U.S. Census Bureau out in Suitland, Maryland, and I really mean way out in Suitland, Maryland, to work with the director of the census, thinking this time I was being sent to Siberia. But I learned a lot about the knowledge of population trends, the tools for the redistricting process, plus the opportunity to study at the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan, which undoubtedly helped me in a technical level. Fourth, I think it was fortunate in my career that David Broder of the Washington Post chose to write the foreword to each of the 2 books that I co-authored with Walter DeVries. And that sort of put me in a new world of where academics and journalists met. And lastly, I was at the right place at the right time when asked to do polling for Bill Clements, who became the first Republican governor in 100 years in Texas. His election became a platform for more realignment outcomes in the New South and the Sun Belt. In summary, I was fortunate to work in some of the most exciting and dynamic periods of time in American election history. And I was on the front lines of many of these really, really big up and down elections. I was able to go from the depths of defeat to eventual victory in the 64 to 72 time frame. Then later the next decade, from Watergate to Reagan in 84. And finally the next decade, leading up to 94, when the U.S. House of Representatives changed party control after nearly a half a century under one-party control. All 3 of these very competitive decades that I lived through proved to me, once again, it's not how you get knocked down, but rather how you get back up. And speaking of that, I need to say something about the GOP's future. I've been troubled these last few election cycles by the lack of a permanent success by my political party. So I've recently signed an agreement to publish another book later this year with another co-author with a working title, How Republicans Could Win in a Changing America, with a subtitle, The Art of War with Lesson Plans. The idea that the Republican Party must adjust to the new rules of the game include being a friend to the Hispanic voter, to the first-time voter, and most importantly, to develop a set of issues, new issues, with a new brand of conservative populism against the status quo. I hope my career shows a history of both mentors and lucky opportunities, and to those people and events, I sincerely say thank you.
And now to introduce our Democratic inductees, Dale Emmons.
Yeah. Thank you, Art, and congratulations to our new inductees. It's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our first inductee today. I'm going to speak from my heart for just a moment, and in the spirit of brevity, I will try to keep it brief. Just 4 years ago, we were at our Poly Conference here in Washington, and we recognized David Axelrod for the brilliant campaign they ran in 2008. But prior to that recognition was a career of having been in the vineyards, up and down the ballot, understanding what politics is all about. And I think the thing I want to point out about David that's most important, he's a builder. I don't know that he's ever torn anything down. He looks at the possibility and the prospect and the opportunity. He assesses the field and figures out what it takes to be successful. Those are very honorable things. You know, I have 2 sons that have been in my business with me. If I could point to another person that could be a role model, David would be high on that list, because he does represent the best of the best. And before we bring him up, I have a special message that we'd like to play for you.
Hi, everybody. I just want to take a moment to congratulate my buddies David Axelrod and David Clough on their induction into the American Association of Political Consultants Hall of Fame. Now, I got to admit, at first I wondered if this was a real organization, or if Axel Clough founded it last week. But then I realized a Hall of Fame for you guys makes sense. There are a few things political consultants love more than honoring their own genius. Knowing Clough, he's probably embarrassed by all the attention. Axe, on the other hand, has wanted to put Hall of Famer on his business cards for decades. But, on a serious note, there's a good chance I wouldn't be here if it weren't for these guys. Axe has been at my side for more than a decade, and both of them were with me from the very first day of my 2008 campaign. Clough as the manager, and Axe as the strategist. And together they helped turn our long shot campaign into one of the most formidable movements in the history of politics. And they did it by never forgetting one fundamental truth. Real change doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up. Unlike a lot of folks in politics, they were willing to cede control to a bunch of untested 20-year-old kids all across the country. They put their faith in volunteers and field organizers and precinct captains. They knew these kids knocking on doors would determine whether or not we won or we lost, and they empowered them. And they never forgot those values when they had a chance to work in the White House through great challenges and unexpected crises. And they never let any of us forget who got us here and what this was all about. Then last year, they helped us earn the chance to finish what we started, to keep working toward a country where everyone who works hard has a fair shot to get ahead. So I could not be more grateful to these guys or more proud of them. Thank you for your advice, your friendship, your enduring commitment to making this country a better place for all of us. Bye-bye.
With that, I'm going to ask David to come up and make some remarks and allow him to introduce our next inductee. David.
My
thought was I was supposed to introduce Clough, and then he was going to talk about me, and then he was going to chime in.
Yeah,
and I was gonna chime
that's
in.
what I want to do.
That's fine.
I had some written remarks which I forgot, and I forgot my glasses as well. So it's just as well that I forgot the written remarks. But I don't need written remarks to speak about my friend David Plouffe. First of all, I'm proud to stand here on behalf of a guy who made it to the Hall of Fame without the help of any performance-enhancing substances. So that's, and he didn't need any because David is a natural. He's a natural, and I think that was apparent from the day that he loaded up his car, left college, loaded up his car, and went out to Iowa to work for Tom Harkin as a field organizer. By the time David was in his mid-20s, he was running major statewide campaigns, including in unforgiving places like New Jersey, successfully. He went on to run the DCCC a few years after that, and then we became partners. And as partners, I got to see firsthand his incisiveness, his character, and his vision. And these are qualities that the whole world has come to see in the last 6 years. You know, the Obama campaigns were known for their discipline, for their cohesiveness, and for the imaginative blending of the old-style shoe leather grassroots campaign with the groundbreaking technology of the 21st century. This was all because of David Plouffe. This was his vision, and he is, without question in my mind, the greatest campaign manager of our lifetime. As I said, he saw the potential of technology to enhance and magnify our organizing efforts, our fundraising efforts, every aspect of our campaign. David was also an unflappable leader of the campaign. He probably, more than anyone I know, is allergic to the conventional wisdom of this town and impatient with the people who are consumers of that conventional wisdom, particularly within our own party, the people he so famously called bedwetters. David is the most competitive person that I know. You don't even want to play a board game with David Plouffe, much less run a campaign against him, because he will do what he needs to, and he will think through, and he will find a way to win. Most of all, David was a great leader for our campaign. He earned the respect of everyone from the very top of the campaign to the bottom, and he gave everyone that respect. But the people he was particularly attached to were those kids, as the president said, those kids in the field, the kids who were just like he was when he went to Iowa. He believed in the power of grassroots politics, and he believed in those young people who were carrying out that task. And he loved those kids, and they revered him. And I revere him as well, because while I have a healthy regard for my own capacities and talents, and I certainly have a great regard for the president's prodigious talents, I think it's fair to say that I wouldn't be standing here today if not for my friend David Plouffe, and the president wouldn't be working in the Oval Office if not for David Plouffe. So I'm really grateful to accept your recognition today, but I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of recognizing a guy who I think is one of the pioneering geniuses in politics today, and a man of tremendous character and commitment, my friend David Plouffe.
Well, thank you, everybody. I want to thank the AAPC for this great honor. It's really a privilege to be honored by your colleagues, competitors, and enemy combatants. I do have a question how that video got on the president's schedule, David. We're going to have to investigate that when we get back. But it's really, for me, the real honor, and it's so fitting, is to be standing here with David. And so I'm going to return some of the compliments. I think he's the most talented political ad maker and message strategist of this generation, and maybe of all time. And it's been a privilege to be in the foxhole with him. His talents, his creativity are well known, but maybe what's lesser known, and I can speak to it because I've been in the foxhole with him, is just the way he does it. He's a guy of great character. As all of you know, when you're in campaigns, there's more bad moments than good moments, and David never asked who made the mistake or whose fault it was, just how are we going to fix it? And he's a great collaborator. He inspires tremendous teamwork. He always remembers it's about the candidates. And when we were business partners, you know, his motto was, we are not going to work for someone when you ask them why they're running for a particular office, can't answer why they're running, says it's because it's the next step on the ladder. He needed to hear from them what they were passionate about, why they wanted to pursue this office. From time to time, it wasn't always the best business decision for our firm at the time. We took on some lost causes, but it's why we ended up with a skinny state senator named Barack Obama. You know, it was David's hand and his skill and his intellect and his creativity that really led him to the United States Senate. And he was our chief creative force. And really, he is the author of so much of what we've done. So it's just an honor to have stood by him through all of our time together, particularly the history we've made over the last 6 years. You just won't find a better person in politics than David. And you know, as you all know, campaigns can be cauldrons. They're very difficult. They're challenging in the most ideal circumstances. But David's just a good human being. And it makes those moments more tolerable when the person standing next to you is somebody that you like, that you trust, that's a person of high character. So I'm thrilled to be here with him. I was struck when I walk in here, there's a lot of young people here, and I guess I'd just like to end by saying, and it's great to see, that for all the talk of great ads and use of technology and grassroots politics and clever campaign strategy and, you know, debate strategy, maybe we shouldn't talk about that, we got to remember what this is all about. And for those of you that are beginning in this business, what we do matters. Because in our country, with the one significant exception, and granted it's a big one, the Civil War, we settle our disputes at the ballot box. Elections are how we set the agenda in this country. Wars we fought and ended, economic policy that's been enacted, healthcare policy, energy policy, how we handle fiscal issues, all those things trace back to elections. And if you have a sense of where your country or your state or your county or your city needs to go, the best way to further that is to elect somebody who shares that view. And that's what this is about. It's not about the clever ads, and it's not about the wins or losses and the blue and red states on election night. It's about the results of those elections, what they mean. And for all of us who've been part of politics, you know, humbly, we've had for a short period of time the ability to put our hand on the wheel of history and try and turn in the direction that we see fit. And so for those of you that are starting out, you know, there's a lot of criticism about what we do, and probably some of it's warranted. We could probably do it a little bit better. Maybe we could do it in a way that nourishes our democracy. But never forget what you're doing out there to try and elect people, no matter the party, no matter what they think about it. If you believe in them, you are shaping this country's history. And that's ultimately what politics and elections are all about. So it's been a privilege to obviously stand by my friend David and all of you as we try and shape the country we see fit. So thank you for this great honor.
So we're doing a little routine here. I get rebuttal time, I guess. Though I have not one thing to rebut, I just want to amplify on what David said and in thanking you on my own behalf. When a lot of folks can't point to the moment in their lives when a lifelong passion began. I can, and it was October 27th, 1960. John F. Kennedy was barnstorming New York 10 days before the 1960 election, at a time when New York was still a swing state. And he came to my housing development where I grew up in New York, Stuyvesant Town. And the woman who took care of me when I was small, when my mother was at work, decided that I should see this, and she took me and she put me on top of a mailbox on 20th Street, this big canyon, and I watched it fill in with people, and I watched as this young, charismatic senator spoke about the future and our responsibilities to the future and each other. And I mean, I didn't understand all of it. I mean, he talked about a new generation of leadership. I don't think he meant 5-year-olds. But I knew that this was important and exciting, and from that moment on, I was hooked. So I've never really thought about politics as a business or campaigns as an industry. I've thought of it, as David said, as an opportunity to put our hands on the wheel of history, as he so elegantly put it, and to make a difference, a positive difference. And I suspect everyone in this room began in that same way. I'm the son of an immigrant. My father and his family fled the pogroms in Eastern Europe. And in the summer of 2009, they spent 4 years trying to get here, by the way, because they believed so deeply that this was a place where dreams could happen and people could, and they could live in freedom. I went back to Russia with the president in July of 2009, and as I stood there in an honor guard as the Russian Army band played our national anthem, I thought about my family and my father and the struggle they went through to come to America because of the deep faith they had in this country. And it happened to be the eve of what would have been my father's 99th birthday. And tears were running down my face. So my message to you is that we scrap very hard in these campaigns. They can be maddening, they can be trite, but let's never ever forget the privilege we have to participate in that process in this great country that has allowed me to live my dreams and allowed you to live yours. And so I'm really grateful for that. And the cherry on the cake is to have the recognition of one's peers as we have today. So I'm very grateful for that as well. Thank you.